Just before dawn on the 30th of April 1943, a British submarine surfaced in the Black Water off the coast of southern Spain. On the casing, a small group of officers unbolted a steel canister labeled optical instruments. Inside was the body of a man in the uniform of a Royal Marines major, a leather briefcase chained to his trench coat. The submarine's captain quietly read Psalm 39 over the corpse, and then they slid him into the sea and let the tide carry him toward the beach. That dead man was about to accomplish something no living soldier could. Within weeks, Adolf Hitler would move entire divisions to the wrong country. The German High Command would redeploy armor, aircraft, and torpedo boats based on his briefcase, and the invasion of Europe would begin against beaches the enemy had half abandoned. The man had never served a day in his life. He did not exist. So how did British intelligence convince Hitler to trust a corpse? To understand the trick, you have to understand the trap the Allies were standing in. By May of 1943, the war in North Africa was won. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in Tunisia, and the entire southern coast of the Mediterranean belonged to the Allies. The next move was obvious: Sicily. The island sat at the dead center of the Mediterranean, like a stepping stone from Africa into Europe, perfectly placed for Allied aircraft and shipping. It was so obvious that Churchill himself reportedly growled that anybody but a damn fool would know it was Sicily. And that was the problem. The Germans were not fools. If they massed their forces on the island, the invasion would have to fight its way ashore through a meat grinder. The Allies could not hide the punch. So they decided to do something far stranger. They would make the Germans dodge the wrong way, using the one messenger no interrogator could ever break. The plan came out of a windowless basement room in the Admiralty, and two men who could not have been less alike. Ewan Montague was a sharp, silver-tongued barrister from a wealthy banking family who had become one of naval intelligence's best deception minds. Charles Chumley was a tall, gangly RAF officer with a magnificent mustache, attached to MI5, a dreamer whose eyesight was too poor to let him fly. So he spent his days inventing schemes most committees laughed out of the room. The idea they fished out of the files was not even new. Years earlier, a memo on intelligence tricks had circulated through the Admiralty, a list of ways to lure the enemy like a fisherman luring a trout. Suggestion number 28 proposed planting fake documents on a corpse and letting it wash ashore. The memo had been issued under the name of Admiral John Godfrey, but much of it was drafted by his personal assistant, a young commander named Ian Fleming, who would later invent a fictional spy called James Bond. The fisherman's memo was about to hook the largest fish in Europe. The concept was simple to say and brutally hard to do. Take a dead body, dress it as a military courier, fill his pockets with a life and his briefcase with secrets pointing away from Sicily. Drop him where the Germans would find him and pray they swallowed it. But the genius of Operation Mincemeat was not the corpse, it was the letter. Instead of a forged battle plan, which no general would ever trust, the team wrote a chatty, personal letter from one real British general to another, the kind of indiscreet note senior officers were never supposed to write. Buried in its gossip was the poison. The real Allied targets were Greece in the east and Sardinia in the west, and the build-up pointing at Sicily was merely the cover story. That was the masterstroke. The Allies knew the Germans would see through a simple lie, so they told them the truth was the lie. Every genuine signal of the coming Sicily invasion, every photograph and intercept would now confirm the deception instead of exposing it. But a letter needs a courier, and a courier needs to be a human being. So British intelligence did something intelligence agencies almost never do. They invented a man from nothing, and they made him slightly disappointing on purpose. Major William Martin of the Royal Marines was born in Cardiff, talented but careless. His pockets told his story. A photograph of his fiancée Pam, actually a clerk at MI5. 2 love letters from her, written by another secretary, and folded and refolded until they looked worn by longing. A receipt for an engagement ring he could barely afford. A stern letter from his bank about an overdraft. Ticket stubs from a London theater. Keys, stamps, a pencil stub, a St. Christopher medal marking him as a Catholic, chosen deliberately because the planners believed devout Spanish authorities would hesitate to order a deep autopsy on a fellow Catholic. No real spy would carry a perfect wallet. Major Martin carried a believably messy one. The Germans would not just find documents, they would find a man, and you do not interrogate a man you have already started to pity. There was just one component missing, and it was the grimmest one: a body. The team needed a corpse that could pass as a drowned air crash victim, and they found one in a London mortuary. Glyndŵr Michael, a homeless Welsh laborer, 34 years old, who had died alone after swallowing rat poison in an abandoned warehouse. He had no money, no career, and no family asking questions. In death, this forgotten man was given a commission, a fiancé, a faith, and a mission of national importance. A famously cooperative coroner quietly released the body. The team packed it in dry ice inside the steel canister, and one of MI5's drivers, a former racing champion, drove it through the blacked-out night from London to a submarine waiting in Scotland. The most important courier of the Second World War traveled to his war in a tin can marked optical instruments. If you are enjoying this story, take a second and hit subscribe. We cover history's greatest deceptions and most unbelievable military operations every single week. The drop point was chosen with surgical care. The coast off Huelva, in neutral Spain. Spain was officially neutral, but crawling with German agents. And in Huelva sat one of the best, a meticulous spy master named Adolf Kloss, who had informants in every port office and police station on that coastline. The British were not hiding the body from the Germans. They were delivering it to a specific German. On the morning of April 30th, a Spanish sardine fisherman spotted the corpse drifting in the shallows. The machine the British were counting on began to turn. Spanish authorities recovered the body, the briefcase went into official custody, and word of a dead British courier carrying sealed military correspondence raced through Huelva to exactly the ears it was meant for. And then, for several agonizing days, nothing happened. The Spanish Navy, correct and cautious, held the briefcase and seemed ready to hand it straight back to the British untouched. In London, Montague and his team faced the most absurd problem in espionage. Their enemy might fail to steal their secrets. The British embassy had to demand the case's return urgently, but not so urgently that the Spanish would suspect, while German agents pulled every string in Madrid to get a look inside. Finally, the pressure worked. The documents were carefully opened, photographed, resealed, and returned through diplomatic channels. When the briefcase came home, British scientists examined the letters and found what they were praying for. A single eyelash that had been folded inside one letter was gone, and the paper showed it had been opened and refolded. The Germans had read everything. A message went to Churchill, then traveling abroad, with one of the great sentences of the war. Mincemeat swallowed rod, line, and sinker. Within days, decoded German signals showed the lie sprinting up the chain of command. German intelligence assessed the documents as genuine, and the assessment landed on Hitler's desk. He did not just believe it, he acted on it with everything he had. Reinforcements flowed to Greece, including a full panzer division transferred across Europe. Torpedo boats and mine layers were redeployed from Sicily to the Aegean. Sardinia and Corsica were strengthened. Rommel himself was eventually sent to Greece to take command of the Phantom Defense. The Mediterranean's defenses pivoted east and west, and the dead center, Sicily, was left exposed. On the night of July 9, 1943, the real invasion began. More than 150,000 Allied soldiers stormed ashore on Sicily in one of the largest amphibious operations ever attempted. And the catastrophe everyone feared did not come. Resistance at the beaches was lighter than almost any planner had dared to hope, and casualties in the first days ran far below estimates. And here is the most astonishing part. Even after Allied troops were physically standing on Sicilian soil, Hitler still believed the island was the feint. For 2 critical weeks, he kept his eyes on Greece and the Balkans, waiting for the real blow that was never coming, holding back forces that might have thrown the landings into crisis. By the end of the month, Sicily was collapsing, and Mussolini, his regime shattered by the invasion, was voted out by his own council and arrested. A corpse in a borrowed uniform had helped knock the first Axis power out of the war. The men behind the trick went back to their quiet lives. Montague later wrote a best-selling book about the operation, and Hollywood filmed it twice. But the strangest epilogue belongs to the courier himself. For half a century, the man in the Huelva grave was known only as Major William Martin. Not until 1998 did the British government formally confirm what researchers had uncovered. The Major was Glyndwr Michael, the homeless man from Wales. Today, his headstone in Spain carries both lives, the real one and the invented one, and a formal acknowledgement that he served. A man who died believing he was nothing was buried with military honors under a name that helped decide the Second World War. And there is one final twist that historians still argue about. The German officer who authenticated the Mincemeat documents, Alexis von Röhn, was one of the sharpest intelligence analysts in the Reich, and he was also secretly anti-Nazi. Some historians believe he saw through the entire deception and endorsed it anyway, deliberately feeding Hitler the lie. A year later, von Röhn was arrested in the purges that followed the plot to assassinate Hitler and executed. If that theory is true, then Operation Mincemeat worked twice over. A British lie, knowingly laundered by a German patriot, both men using the same corpse to steer the same tyrant. The most successful deception of the war may have succeeded because the enemy wanted to be deceived. Either way, the lesson of Mincemeat has outlived everyone who built it. The best lie is not the one that hides the truth. It is the one that makes the truth unbelievable. The Allies never managed to hide the invasion of Sicily, so they wrapped it in a better story, carried by a man who could never crack under questioning, never contradict himself, and never betray the mission. If this story pulled you in, subscribe and drop a like so more people can find this channel. And tell us in the comments, do you think von Röhn was fooled? Or did he let the lie through on purpose?